Chapter 5:10. The middle-aged man in the camera had a long and narrow face with deep eye sockets. His expression didn't change even when Tianbang pointed at him. The audience in the live broadcast room were guided by Tianbang's words. Most of them looked at the man's forehead. However, this man was wearing a police cap. The hood of the cap covered his face. From the angle of the camera, they couldn't see what was underneath the cap. Zhang Ji wanted to change the angle of the camera, but judging from Tianbang's words. No, Tianbang didn't even need to hint. As an outstanding streamer, Zhang Ji's brain contained the video data of all registered extraordinaries and the vast majority of B-rank powerhouses in the world. Under the new stimulation, she was able to confirm the true identity of the police officer in front of her in a flash. Oh my God! Zhang Ji unconsciously let out a low cry. Perhaps her reaction was too big, but it drew the attention of the police officer. His light brown eyes revealed an ice-cold ruthlessness. It was just like the silver metal headband that was revealed after he took off his police cap. The headband covered most of this person's forehead. Strange symbols were engraved on it, unrecognizable to ordinary people. Under the illumination of the lights in the room, the symbols protruded as if they could struggle out at any time. It was extremely mysterious. When this special metal headband appeared, all uncertainties came to an end. Iron Hoop, Jin Tong. Extraordinary. The leader of the 5 metal hunting group. He was without a doubt one of the most powerful hunters in the world. This was a true powerhouse at the level of the Great 100. The number of viewers in the live broadcast room exploded by 50% in an instant. It had already broken 12,000 people. Compared to the number of internet celebrities in the world, this number was certainly a tragedy. But it must be known that this was already a fifth of the entire society. Jin Tong has entered Xia City. Gang Xiong just died. A storm is coming. No, the heavens are already crying from fright. Ah, I want to go to Xia City too. Jin Tong's arrival undoubtedly proved that the rumors of 2 out of 1,000 and 16 billion were correct in a realistic sense. Even though He Yueyin had just expressed the firm attitude of the Xia City branch half a minute ago, it couldn't stop the crazy growth of weeds in the hearts of certain people. Xia City has Ouyang Chen and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Jin Tong has already arrived. There may be even more powerhouses rushing there. But I can always go watch the excitement. Besides, so many powerhouses have gathered in Xia City. What if both sides are injured? What if I'm a little luckier, and the fisherman really benefits from it? At this moment, it was unknown how many people were watching the live broadcast while booking flights to Xia City. Moreover, they were piously praying. Fight! 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 It would be best if they fought until the sky turned dark, until the sun and moon lost their light. Only then would they be able to give opportunists like them a chance. Perhaps due to the prayers of tens of thousands of people, the atmosphere at the scene of death was indeed cold and stiff. This was especially true for Jin Tong, a dignified extraordinary, who had been exposed with a single sentence, and in such a mocking tone. Even if Jin Tong wasn't a vain person who cared about status and style, he still had a high self-esteem. It was just like how after his whereabouts were exposed, he took the initiative to remove his disguise and come face to face with her. He looked straight at Tianbang. Youngsters these days grow their wings early. Deep Blue is indeed a nurturing place. Tianbang faced the transcendent Belle's cold gaze, but he could still smile. Mr. Jin is much thinner than I imagined. You can actually still wear such a big headband. Presumably, you're interested in Deep Blue because you're in the health business. It looks like the information we heard wasn't without reason. He didn't retreat as he spoke. Instead, he advanced forward. He laughed as he took 2 steps to the side, blocking Jin Tong and the metal component on the ground. I heard that Mr. Jin's cultivation hasn't been smooth in recent years, so he blazed a new path and played with some fancy tricks. He started a prosthetic game on the members of his hunting squad. He's trying to correct his path and climb to new heights. I wonder how he's progressing? Jin Tong's gaze grew even colder. He didn't respond and directly moved forward. How big was the workshop at the scene of death? The group of people were very close. In the blink of an eye, the distance between Jin Tong and Tianbang was already only an arm's length apart. But Tianbang's expression didn't change. Mr. Jin's extraordinary power is metallization. The matter of changing the nature of a material sounds grand and grand. I just want to know, How should the relationship between the metal used for prosthetic games and Mr. Gene be expressed? Is it the kind of mysterious illusory wind that splits the mind and splits the soul? Before he finished speaking, a long sizzling sound rang out. It was as if a piece of red-hot iron had been repeatedly thrown into ice water. It brought about a great deal of bubbles and white smoke. At this moment, at least 20 layers of format fire soared in the space of an arm's length apart. Layer upon layer, they collectively constructed the tightest format domain. But Jin Tong was even faster than Tian Bang by an instant. He raised his hand without hesitation and exerted force. His palm suffused with a metallic luster stabbed straight at Tian Bang's chest. Dignity was one thing, and actual combat was another. Jin Tong didn't have the self-awareness of a traditional senior expert. When an expert clearly expressed hostility, whether it was a mutant or a burner, raising his hand and killing them was the correct choice. What's more, Jin Tong had an idea of Tian Bang's reputation. The first person below the extraordinary, the successful combination of the burner and the blood flame system, the most successful example of Project Deep Blue. All these titles combined together was enough to prove that his strength couldn't be underestimated. And there was also He Yueyin at his side. A burner could launch a combined attack at any time, anywhere. It definitely wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Of course, it wasn't complicated. Jin Tong had never felt that there was anything in the world more difficult than one's own cultivation. He was a fleshly body strengthened. Even after becoming an extraordinary, the gap between spirit and fleshly body had rapidly shrunk. However, his fleshly body was still his most powerful weapon. The stronger one was, the better one had to be at using it. Jin Tong's body had already become semi-metallic wherever his thoughts passed. His flowing bodily fluids also changed slightly in nature. Surging power circulated and passed through the special structure of his body and soul. It stimulated the free electrons within the metal crystals and instantly formed a powerful electric current. Amidst crackling sounds, the electric arc shot out and further ionized the air. It continuously increased the strength of the electric field and formed a violent conflict with the format domain. Amidst the crackling sounds, the format fire and electric fire interweaved and then spread in all directions. Apart from He Yueyin, who was already participating in the attack and defense in the form of the format domain, everyone else in the room was out of luck. Everyone's bodies were paralyzed. Some of the unlucky policemen who were in the worst position were hit head-on by the high-voltage electric current. Even though the format fire had melted some of it, it was as if they had been hit by a heavy fist. They were sent flying into the wall and then fell down. At this time, their skin was charred black and on fire. It was unknown if they could survive. The electric field of the extraordinary domain wasn't actually good at killing, but under the coverage of the domain, the powerful ionization and electrolysis could destroy the basic structure of all matter and then reassemble it into a mess at will. The format domain was also seriously affected, and its structure was basically on the border of deformation and collapse. Jin Tong still had the strength to change the direction of the electric field's strength. His energy beam took form, but the twisted arcs of light were like knives and whips. There was even a terrifying heat rising. Just by streaking across the air, a tyrannical aura of death came rushing over. Jin Tong controlled all of this from the center of the electric field. Wherever his thoughts passed, the lightning whips lashed out as they pleased. Even though the two peak burners were protected by the combined formatted domains, their arms, chests, shoulders, and cheeks were all left with scorched marks. Jin Tong aimed the killing power of the electric whip at He Yueyin. As for the other, the metal structure in the corner warped soundlessly, turning into a narrow and thin blade. It shot up soundlessly and went straight for Tian Bang's lower abdomen. Everyone had to die in a specific way. Lightning flashed, and the killing intent was imminent. He Yueyin had actually raised a metal blade with good conductivity, and Tian Bang seemed to be completely unaware of the killing intent that was so close to him. Let's end this. Jin Tong felt the cold and tight headband on his head, and his thoughts focused. But in the instant that the electric light completely tore apart the format domain, a new power came crashing down from above. Suppression. That power was so terrifying that it directly pressed down from above. It was majestic and magnificent, but it also perfectly matched the format domain. Under its guidance, the format of fire that had already been destroyed and scattered actually surged in an instant, as if a roaring active volcano was being suppressed. The extraordinary electric field domain instantly warped. Under the effect of the power, The floor beneath Jin Tong's feet was like rotten soil, or maybe it was simply melted. Having lost his support, he fell rapidly. It was only then that Jin Tong had a hilariously vigilant thought, which proved that even his spiritual will had been disturbed in that short period of time just now. The moment the sense of danger arose, alarm bells rang. As one of the most outstanding hunters, Jin Tong instinctively wanted to retreat, or at least break away from this completely passive situation. But his opponent didn't give him any openings to exploit. That power was truly integrated as one, piercing straight down from the top of his head. The pressure skyrocketed until the high temperature rolled in reverse, lightning coiled around his body, and the electric field swayed chaotically. Jin Tong growled in a low voice. He had already used an explosive secret technique to resist the tremendous pressure that was pressing down. The power of pressure and recoil intersected, and the entire office building he was in seemed to be filled with gunpowder. Dozens of floors collapsed one after another, and sparks shot out in all directions, blasting hundreds of meters away. The surrounding buildings were all shaking, and large pieces of glass walls cracked at almost the same time, raining down a storm of shards. The 75th floor of the office building swayed at an angle of almost 30 degrees. Zhang Ji was hit head-on by the shockwave and fell into a corner. She was so confused that even the camera crashed into the wall. Fortunately, she relied on her professional instincts and quickly moved her hand over to act as a buffer. She also grabbed the camera in time to ensure that the thing that made a living could still be used normally. Fortunately, the floating camera had been modified by a famous expert, and it could still maintain its working state in such a tragic electromagnetic field. Only the internal light sensors and corresponding components were operating crazily, barely digesting the stimulation of the strong light and the shockwave, restoring a relatively clear image to the live stream room. The live stream room, which had gathered nearly 15,000 people, was completely silent. The streamer didn't speak, and most people forgot to join in. Under the influence of the herd mentality, the image was clean, and there was only the crack that led straight to the bottom of the building, as well as the sparks and lightning that were spewing out from inside. It was like an active volcano in the city. And from this bottomless crack came Jin Tong's slightly hoarse roar. Wuxia! The sound and visual effects aren't bad. Chapter 5:11. Was the volcano about to erupt? The office building shook to such an extent that it seemed like it would snap in half at any moment. Zhang Ji was swaying left and right, her vision spinning. But half a second later, she successfully controlled the floating camera to fly out of the window. From a vertical angle, she captured part of the explosive scene from the 50th floor of the office building. This surging scene fully demonstrated Zhang Ji's ability to capture the camera after years of seeking death. Of course, at this time no one would think that much. Most of the viewers in the live stream could only stare dumbfounded at the high-rise office building. From the base to the top, half of the building had been washed by the shock waves of flames and lightning. From this scene, it could be seen that Jin Tong had been struck from the 75th floor all the way to the surface. He was more than 300 meters high, and the floor slabs, steel bars, metal frames, and so on were destroyed. Moreover, this did not include the number of people who might have died inside the building. This was a battle between extraordinaries. For most of the viewers in the live stream who paid attention to the battle results, this was not the first time they had seen extraordinary spar, fight, or even fight to the death. But that was because they had to rely on advanced video technology to watch relevant videos, highlights, and so on. There were less than 100 extraordinaries in the world, so it was impossible for them to be their live stream guests all the time. A very small number of people would occasionally be lucky enough to see a live broadcast, which was enough for them to savor for 3 to 5 years. But now, a true extraordinary level battle was unfolding in front of their eyes. On one side was Iron Hoop Jin Tong, one of the strongest wild hunters in the world. As for the other side, the name Jin Tong shouted had already revealed who his opponent was. Her Majesty Empress Wu. Ever since her battle with the High Priestess of the Public Church 2 months ago, announcing to the world that she had become an extraordinary, Her Majesty Empress Wu had finally revealed her extraordinary power to the world once again. Compared to the unfathomable mysteries on the spiritual level, there was no doubt that the current scene of buildings collapsing and mountains shaking was more in line with the aesthetics of the general public. Under the constant shaking of the camera, the number of viewers in Zhang Ji's live stream broke through from 15,000 to 20,000 in just a few seconds. Then, it continued to skyrocket. By the time the dust at the bottom of the stairs blocked everyone's view, the number of viewers watching the dust-filled scene had already exceeded 28,000. This had already exceeded 40% of the society's membership. On one hand, one could see how attractive a battle between extraordinaries was. On the other hand, one could see that the Xia City disturbance possessed an astonishing level of popularity. This was the reason why such a large number of spectators could explode in such a short period of time. Zhang Ji had not paid attention to the situation in the live broadcast room for a long time. In a dangerous building that could collapse at any moment, she could only try her best to calm her heartbeat. At the same time, she prayed to the gods around her, hoping that the main battlefield between the two extraordinaries would appear in the area her camera could cover. Of course, this was just wishful thinking. For extraordinaries, the topography of an office building was never a reason to restrain them from using form displacement and transposition. If they wanted to, the entire Xia City would become their battlefield. How could a puny little streamer determine the direction for two extraordinaries? But just as Zhang Ji was gasping for breath and praying, someone suddenly grabbed her by the shoulder. The person's posture was very intimate, and he even blew a breath of air into her earlobe. "Oh, Zhang Ji, don't be nervous. A beautiful and dedicated streamer like you is very rare in this world. The heavens will certainly make your wishes come true." Major General Tian. Zhang Ji didn't care that Tian Bang was taking advantage of her. She was just angry that this fellow had disturbed her work. Tian Bang chuckled as he stuck close to her. He continued to give her advice. "You must hold the camera firmly. You can't miss out on a wonderful scene." What did he mean? Zhang Ji was stunned for a moment. Then, she saw a blurry figure soar into the sky amidst the dust and smoke that filled the sky. It was Jin Tong. Given Zhang Ji's strength, it would be very difficult for her to keep up with the speed of an extraordinary if she really wanted to dash forward like a hurricane. This was the case even with the assistance of a camera worth millions. But at this moment, Zhang Ji could clearly see Jin Tong's figure soar into the sky. She also saw the figure's speed grow slower and slower. It was as if his momentum had come to an end, but it was more like he was being forcefully restrained by some invisible force. It was clearly not the gravity of Earth. It was an even more unyielding and direct force, an even more terrifying and tyrannical force. In the next second, Zhang Ji saw Jin Tong, who had reached the end of his ascending momentum, become like a deformed baseball. He was fiercely struck by an invisible club. A powerful force poured into him, sending him flying. His speed had increased explosively by more than 10 times, 100 times. In the face of such a terrifying acceleration, the originally continuous footage became disjointed. In that instant, the vast majority of people only heard the sound of an explosion. They saw the cloud of the sonic boom explode and the dust and smoke in that area disappear. Jin Tong's figure had disappeared. Chapter 5:12. Don't get distracted. Tian Bang reminded her. Zhang Ji looked up in shock and saw the dark clouds above Xia City distort once more. They burst apart. Although the turbulence was great, there was no sound. It was because of this that the pencil-straight long scar that nearly sunk into the horizon suddenly twisted and fell diagonally downwards. They were still fighting. Zhang Ji looked up at the strange scene in the sky and was delighted at first. She felt that the live broadcast could continue, but then she realized that the battlefield was too far away. It was beyond her reach. The broadcast room was filled with howls of grief when they saw the transmitted image. Some people didn't give up and encouraged, "Brothers and sisters of Xia City, it's time for you to show your worth." There really was a response from Xia City. "I'm looking at Dongshuan Beach. I'm going with you." Squeak. "I'll go." They're specifically currying favor with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Please share your live broadcast room number. Please open up the donation channel. It'll be easier to handle the aftermath. No matter how noisy the broadcast room was, Zhang Ji was very anxious. She looked all around, trying to find a miraculous way to rush over. At this time, her earlobes heated up again. Tian Bang continued to tease. "Do you need a ride? I just happen to have a flying car. I can just go downstairs." Zhang Ji turned her head. After being taken advantage of for so long, she finally saw Tian Bang's face after the battle. Tian Bang was actually in a sorry state at the moment. His hair was a little unkempt because he was directly facing Jin Tong's extraordinary electric field, and there was even a scorch mark on his face, adding some blood and fire to his sunny boyish smile. Of course, It also revealed part of his true nature. Zhang Ji blinked. The bit of emotion in her heart was quickly diluted. Doubts surged in her mind, and the vague thoughts that originally existed gradually became clear. You guys. Sure. You can't use the word we carelessly. I'm such a clean stream. When you mention me, it sounds like I'm forming a clique and scheming. That's how it was. Zhang Ji was about to ask again when Tianbang took the lead. He leaped out of the broken window and flew downwards. This office building had been tossed around for so long. Anyone who wanted to use the elevator would have a serious problem with their intelligence. Zhang Ji naturally followed, but when she came out of the window, she subconsciously turned her head. She saw He Yuan staying at the scene. She had no intention of following. Hey, hurry up! Tianbang called out from below. Zhang Ji caught up. What about Vice President He? She also has to clean up the mess. Ever since she became a secretary, this skill has been maxed out. I'm training Zhu Ling so that he can learn more. Zhang Ji sighed. She felt that Tianbang's description of Officer He's character was a little broken. It makes sense if he was the one providing support. It would be in line with his usual style. This way we can explain things to the government and the military. With the confluence of the military and government forces, does Xia City really want to play independent? It can't compare to some headquarters. They sell their bodies to lick the boots of others while they're at it. Xia Chue is inflated. It's full of farts inside. Motherf asterisk cur. I'll give you this. Which bastard was the one who leaked the 2000s? Several floors later, the map rumbled and exploded. At this time, those who still persisted in rational discussion belonged to the outliers. Someone in the middle asked weakly, "What if Her Majesty Empress Wu did all of this by herself? What does that mean?" This was originally a very good question, but a certain ID cut in at the right time and analyzed the overall situation. His mouth was very big, and his tone was even louder. Xia City probably wants to establish its might. Ouyang Chen and Yu Gang are certainly involved in this plan, and they most likely didn't play a good role. Establishing its might is especially effeminate. Can it really frighten people without the deaths of millions? F*CK. The person above just opened his mouth. That's awesome. The person above is the one with commendable courage. That's right, I'm talking about you. The great blood demon is mighty. He hit the nail on the head. Purple gold authentication. It really is blood demon. I'll take a photo with Great God Blood Demon as a souvenir. Is Great God Blood Demon still accepting disciples? Can I kneel first? Because of the sudden appearance of the extraordinary Blood Demon, the RT-8313 mission thread became exceptionally noisy. After a series of tosses and turns, the thread basically reached a consensus. Indeed, under the provocation of 2016 billion resources, the eyes of the vast majority of people would turn red with greed. If Xia City was suspected to be an allied power and haggled over the lives of people at this time, it probably wouldn't serve as a deterrent. Instead, it would encourage the greed of certain people and nurture their wishful thinking. So you're saying that Jin Tong can also retreat unscathed? Most likely. How many extraordinaries are there in the society? If one were to be cut down just like that, the pressure on Xia City would be enormous. In the thread, someone had already posted a crying laughing emoji. Thanks to the Great Blood Demon's auspicious words, I will immediately book a plane ticket to Xia City. When I return, I might even be able to get the treatment of being escorted out of the country as a gift. Shameless as the person above. Will you allow me to tour Xia City with you? Let's go together. One-way plane tickets should be enough. Dog fart. Pure trash. Zhang Yingying was still spinning around on the Huanhai Highway due to the problem of the journey. She was already very annoyed, but when she saw the message on the forum, her anger surged. She smashed her fist on the steel plate of the car. There was a loud bang, and the place where she smashed her fist made a deep dent. This is an armored car. The corner of the special police officer's eye twitched, but he didn't dare to say anything. Zhang Yingying's anger had yet to subside. She smashed the car 2 more times. Suddenly, she froze. Her gaze pierced through the front windshield and looked at the scenery of the sea and sky outside the Huanhai Highway. After going around for half a day, she had actually fought her way here. Stop the car. The armored car finally got the chance to show off its performance. It came to a screeching stop. Zhang Yingying pushed open the car door and leaped. She circled around the body of the car like a flipping petrel and plunged down the sea of the precipice. When the special police officer staggered out of the car, he saw the long-legged beauty with a strange temper running fast on the precipice, still heading for the golden beach in the distance. With a muffled bang, a column of water dozens of meters high exploded on the surface of the sea 100 meters offshore. The surging waves and the splashing water droplets almost slaughtered all the creatures in the surrounding water, including the undercurrents in the deeper water. After such a series of actions, the terrifying kinetic impact was finally reduced by more than half. Ah! Jin Tong gasped loudly. He popped his head out of the shallow water, but he spat out another mouthful of blood, which mixed with the icy rain, salt water, gray waves and white foam. There were also the remains of several fish and jellyfish. He felt that most of his soul had been lost. But he didn't have time to think about the extent of the injury to his body and soul. Instead, he used all his strength to stimulate his yuan qi and calm his mind. He also prepared an overbearing secret technique to stimulate his potential, ready to withstand the terrifying impact from Her Majesty Empress Wu. However, after a few seconds, although the pressure from the opposite side was always there, the substantial impact did not come. I actually smashed into the sea. Good luck. The sound waves were transmitted from the golden beach that faced the sea. Under the erosion of the freezing rain, the color of the beach was somewhat dim, like an orange peel that was close to rotting. Jin Tong was even more convinced that it was the death domain of the beauty on the shore. This Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was respectfully addressed by the world, was now like a petty bourgeois girl strolling in the morning. She wore a classic white shirt paired with black wide-legged pants, with a slightly unruly leopard belt in the middle. Her shoes and socks could not be seen clearly. She could only see that her clothes were light and thin, swaying gently in the wind. Her Majesty Empress Wu's attention was still on the book, or it could be said that she was in the most comfortable state she had created for herself. Jin Tong's clear questioning words entered her ears, but she didn't even raise her eyelids. I warned you before not to go ashore, or else I would beat you to death. Let's not talk about the process, but now you've perfectly fallen back into the sea and haven't set foot on the shoreline. For the sake of this luck, I won't see you out. Jin Tong stared fixedly at Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't believe that the basis of this woman's decision was some damned luck, or whatever. Even saying it was mood was more reliable than that. But he didn't say anything else. In this kind of situation, he would be an idiot if he spat out another word. Jin Tong had fought with the aberrations in the wilderness all year round, and it wasn't the first time he had encountered a crisis that could kill him. This had also trained him to be soft and hard, straightforward and submissive in his style of doing things. If he couldn't beat her, then he couldn't beat her. If Her Majesty Empress Wu really wanted his life, he would fight to the death. But since she didn't care about him, what harm was there in enduring for a moment and retreating? Jin Tong slowly breathed in and out. His body cut through the icy cold water and slowly moved backwards. But at this moment, he suddenly heard a vague sound. Someone was rushing over at lightning speed, and the content of the shouts was related to him. His heart jumped slightly, and he looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu on the shore. Even though there was a third party involved, this beautiful woman still didn't have any intention of changing her decision. The book in her hands flipped over another page. The patter of freezing rain fell, drenching her clothes and long hair, but when it touched the page, it all silently melted away. He had already been completely ignored. This wasn't an act. Perhaps from the very beginning, Her Majesty Empress Wu had never cared about him. Jin Tong gave Her Majesty Empress Wu a deep look. He wanted to carve this clearly high-profile, yet mysterious woman into his heart. Soon after, his entire body sank into the surface of the sea, retreating towards the deep sea. A few seconds later, he disappeared into the misty depths of the vast ocean. Hey, 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 hey! Just half a minute after Jin Tong disappeared, Zhang Yingying rushed over from the distant Huanhai Highway, panting. But in the end, she was still a step too late. She could only watch helplessly as Jin Tong disappeared into the distance. Her enthusiasm of seeing the battlefield fly over from beyond the sky and joining in on the fun was completely doused in ice. Zhang Yingying looked at her boss with a gaze of disbelief. Although she knew that no one could guess her boss's thoughts in this dangerous time of war, To send off a great extraordinary enemy with a wave of his hand, such a strange train of thought. No, someone on the internet had clearly deduced this. Boss, you. Zhang Yingying wanted to say, Boss, are you crazy? But she finally knew how to swallow those words. Then she wanted to say, don't tell me you guys really don't dare to kill me. But she felt that it was too sudden. Following that, her quick-witted mind couldn't find a third suitable replacement word. She could only say, you, for a long time. Even though she couldn't say the words out loud, her attitude was expressed. Her Majesty Empress Wu still gave face to her subordinates. She moved her gaze away from the scroll in her hand and looked at Zhang Yingying. She nodded and said, you've almost reached the limit of your current level. The effects of cultivating your mind and body during this period of time are not bad. Next, you need to carve out your own path in order to change your fate and become independent from the world. Defy the heavens and change my fate? Boss, you've read too many novels. Zhang Yingying was so angry that she laughed. Also, are you reading Buddhist scriptures? Had he read too many Buddhist scriptures and learned the heart of a bodhisattva? That place is obviously full of bragging ****. Her Majesty Empress Wu turned her gaze back to the scroll. She said unhurriedly, no matter how you boast, as long as you can boast to the point that many people don't doubt it, it can also be considered an extraordinary power that defies the heavens and changes fate. Of course, it would be better if there was a self-consistent logic. Considering that this is the result of an uncivilized civilization, it's not unreasonable to raise its value a bit higher. Ah, Your Majesty, I'm not discussing Buddhist scriptures with you. You said it first. Then I'll tell you now. Why did you let the enemy escape? Answer me. Indulging the enemy? I didn't. You're still saying you didn't? I saw it all. That Jin Tong escaped right under your eyes. Didn't you see the comments online? Those greedy, insatiable, and lawless troublemakers are all celebrating, okay? You let Jin Tong go. You're simply encouraging them to come to Xia City to hunt. Luo Nan's side is dead. You're talking about Jin Tong. Has he broken away from the battlefield? Her Majesty Empress Wu raised her gaze once more. She looked at the drizzling rain falling from the sky. She casually extended her hand and caught a drop of rain on her fingertip. She pinched it lightly. If everyone believes that he has broken away, then I have nothing to say. Zhang Yingying was at a loss and puzzled. When you're weak, acting cute is instinctive. When you're in danger, being low-key is smart. But when you need to be responsible, you still play old tricks. This malicious act of acting cute is just asking for a beating. Luckily, Yingying, you're still in the legal stage of acting cute. Come on, smile for us to see. Zhang Yingying wanted to kneel before her boss. She was just about to throw caution to the wind and unleash her great act of unreasonable behavior when her heart inexplicably trembled. The white rainbow circulating around her body hummed. It was as if a layer of gloomy clouds had condensed into a clear intent. But when she tried to sense it again, it was hard to grasp. She just felt that the dusky scene of the sea and sky before her eyes seemed to have become much more oppressive. It made people feel that she was not only broad-minded, but also had a mature and stable set of rules. From Jin Tong's point of view, Her Majesty Empress Wu's attack had no flaws or weaknesses. Every detail was perfect, forming a towering peak that could not be moved. This was the so-called, the more you look up to it, the more you look up to it. What was a divine weapon and what was a piece of scrap metal? It was clear as soon as one touched it. In fact, when the martial monarch released the techniques of the dripping sword and the burning heart saber on the internet, it had already given people such a feeling. It wasn't difficult to come up with an offensive technique. What was truly difficult was to be precise, concise, and high-level. The more Jin Tong experienced it, the more he felt that there was a lot of knowledge in it. Looking at it this way, even though he had lost miserably, he had gained a lot as well. It would be greatly beneficial for him to comprehend it carefully when he returned. Jin Tong sighed unconsciously. Are there really people who are born with knowledge in this world? No, that's not right. Jin Tong suddenly shook his head and subconsciously touched the metal band on his forehead. The perennial chill seeped into his skull, but it suddenly stirred up a fire in his heart. There was no such thing as someone who was born with knowledge in this world. Putting the miraculous label on an unsolved matter was just the behavior of a fool. Rather than putting someone else on a pedestal, It was better to put himself in their shoes and think. Perhaps Her Majesty Empress Wu's achievements had a more complicated origin. Just like what he had experienced in the past. The fire in his heart didn't last too long, and baseless speculation couldn't solve his current injuries. Jin Tong sank that speculation to the bottom of his heart and wanted to find a relatively safe area to recuperate. He moved, gently shaking his body to rub against the vibrations of the seawater. He emitted ultrasonic waves like a dolphin, probing the surrounding terrain and the living creatures. This was a small technique that experts of the physical side used in place of spiritual senses. It was said that there were many living creatures in the natural world that could emit ultrasonic waves and infrasound waves. Dolphins, bats, tigers, and elephants before the era of distortion were all typical examples. After the change of generations, there were only more such living creatures. Jin Tong knew that there were at least 100 species of living creatures on land and in the sea that possessed similar instincts. However, to be like Luo Nan of Xia City, to be able to emit destructive high-energy infrasound waves by relying on a mutant tool that wasn't even remotely related, or... Oh? Jin Tong's thoughts suddenly froze. That's not right. There was no reason for him to suddenly think of Luo Nan. This state of wanton spreading was completely different from that person's strict style. In other words, there was actually a third person besides Ouyang Chan and Her Majesty Empress Wu. This person was... Jin Tong carefully sensed the concentrated emotions and killing intent in this region, and he came to an answer. There was no doubt that only those extraordinary characters of the mental side, and they weren't bound by common sense, could construct such a weak yet inconceivably embryonic domain. There were many famous characters in Xia City, but most of them were already set in stone. There was only one up-and-coming star who had made a great name for himself in a short period of time. Moreover, this star was one of Jin Tong's targets in his trip to Xia City. Luo Nan? Was it him? Jin Tong was still a bit uncertain. The interference power of this freezing rain domain towards the plane of reality was very ordinary. It lacked a constructed pillar and backbone, and it wouldn't pose too much of a threat to true experts. But how far was he from the shore? He used the satellite positioning system to confirm his latitude and longitude. He was roughly 200 nautical miles away from Xia City. The straight-line distance was nearly 400 kilometers. If the range of Xia City itself was included, then it could be said that it was truly 1,000 kilometers away. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth. What a joke. Anyone who could expand their mental senses to 1/10 of the range would be an extraordinary. Then what was this fellow? Extraordinary X10? Jin Tong suddenly understood how Gang Xiong and Noise had died. Doing things within this range of mental senses was practically the same as putting one's heart against the tip of a knife, shouting, "If you don't stab me to death, then you're my grandson." What was the point of not dying? Though he was already several hundred kilometers away from Xia City, Luo Nan's knife light had begun to draw shadows behind his neck. Jin Tong snorted coldly when he thought of this. His energy surged outwards, forcefully breaking through the rain and mist that filled the sky. The penetrating chill was isolated outside. He soon discovered that this was meaningless. He suspected that Luo Nan's domain did not specialize in confinement and killing. It was more like a carrier for mental senses. So what if he drove it away and shielded it? The dividing line of the sea and sky scene was several dozen kilometers wide. It was vast and mighty, and it was hard to see the end. How could he drive it away with the strength of one person? Could it be that he had guessed wrong? Luo Nan had the strength of one person. How in the world did he accomplish this? He carefully examined the principles of this domain. It was connected to the polar domain above and to the microscopic form below. Only by severing this connection would he be able to act. It would have been fine if he was on the mental side. At worst, he could just retaliate back. But in this current situation, Jin Tong let out a breath. He was simply unable to estimate the limits of Luo Nan's soul strength. He was also unable to imagine the scale of Luo Nan's reserves. Cough, cough. His blood rushed to his throat, causing a knot to form in his heart. His irritation gradually rose. If he were at his peak, he wouldn't care. Even if Luo Nan entangled him, Luo Nan would be nothing more than a mosquito. Luo Nan would not be able to harm his foundation. But right now, he urgently needed to find a place to heal his injuries. How could he gather his strength if he was constantly being watched? Jean Tong suppressed his negative emotions with difficulty, but he knew that he had to change his plans. He hoped that Her Majesty Empress Wu was a person who kept her promise. He used his wristband to contact his subordinate who had been lingering in the open sea. He reported his current coordinates. "Come here and pick me up." It was safest for an injured beast to lick its wounds in an isolated and uninhabited place. But right now, Luo Nan was like a maggot attached to the bone. He needed to leave the sea area covered by the freezing rain domain as soon as possible. He crossed the dividing line with the fastest speed possible, suppressing the expansion speed of Luo Nan's domain. Jean Tong quickly hung up the phone, but he could still hear his subordinate trembling with excessive joy. Clearly, the news of his great defeat in Xia City had already spread. "Do they think I'm going to die?" Jean Tong snorted coldly. He recalled the rather famous female streamer from the inner world in the office building. With such a person there, the news of him being blasted out of Xia City would probably be known by the entire world. Even though he was at his level, empty fame was no longer a burden. But when he thought of Her Majesty Empress Wu's awe-inspiring divine might, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. His thoughts reached this point, and his mind became a bit absent-minded. He unconsciously recalled the details of his experience fighting against Her Majesty Empress Wu. He pondered over how he should deal with her if they were to fight again. It was absolutely impossible for ordinary methods to match up to her perfection and profoundness. His thoughts entered the alley, and it was hard to deviate. Jean Tong stood on the surface of the sea, his mind immersed within. He was in a trance, unaware of the passage of time. Jean Tong only came to his senses when the sound of his subordinate's airship entered his ears. He wanted to move, but his chest suddenly felt stifled. He discovered that he was lacking in blood essence. Hiss, I was actually exhausting my mind to make a deduction just now. How could I do something so unwise? Jean Tong's mind was agitated, and it was as if a cup of ice water had been poured over his heart. He suddenly felt that something was wrong. Chapter 5:14. The airship came close to the surface of the water. Someone on the deck finally struggled out of his terror and shouted loudly to remind his captain. However, he couldn't say anything in his anxiety. Jean Tong didn't need to be reminded to know that he had fallen into a trap. Just as the shadow appeared, his sensitive spiritual sense was covered by a layer of mist, making it hard for him to see clearly. He sank his mind and subconsciously took a step out on the surface of the sea. He saw a black curtain falling from the sky, covered by an infinite starry sky. He saw smoke and clouds rising together, and there was even the sound of metal clanking. As for the feeling on his body, it became even worse. It was as if he was wrapped by something, and it was very difficult to move. Jean Tong's face darkened. Just as he was about to return to his inner vision to check his meridians, a huge furry claw suddenly stretched out from the depths of the smoke and clouds, pouncing towards him. Blood-colored flames curled around it. Before it could be seen, the surrounding void and even the spiritual plane were already rumbling and shaking. It was as if a volcano had erupted, shaking the earth and mountains, and the scorching heat was pressing down. Such a close distance, such a violent method, and it could even surround the spiritual and material planes. There was no room for people to move or dodge. It was difficult to even find the time to think. Jean Tong's eyes flashed with electricity. He slashed with his half-metal arm, and the electric long blade slashed down with thunder. The electric blade and blood claw collided with each other. Smoke and clouds surged, and the black curtain distorted. One could hear the sound of waves and wind. The sound of the real world seemed to be separated by a thin layer of paper, but it couldn't penetrate no matter what. F***ck it. Jean Tong's hostility increased, and he slashed down with another electric blade. Electric arcs flashed like a dragon. When the dual-purpose airship crashed into the water, the members of the 5-metal hunting group on it saw Jean Tong submerged in a cloud of flickering smoke. Within it, there was a blood-like flame burning, and there was also a long chain of electric light darting left and right. The light was dazzling, but the cloud was cloudy and constantly expanding. In the blink of an eye, it covered an area of several square kilometers. It was even more impenetrable. At most, they could see some blurry silhouettes. There was their captain inside, and there was also a huge and shocking demonic shadow. It seemed like they were engaged in an intense battle. The person in charge of the airship was a bald man named Tong Can. He was also an architect with a combat strength of B-. He was quite famous in the inner world for his brutal and fierce close combat skills. He was a first-rate grandmaster of combat, and was the classic example of someone who was careless on the outside but meticulous on the inside. He was in the control room right now, looking at the marvelous scene on the surface of the sea. He thought to himself, could it be that Xia City is unforgiving? Could it be that they sent people to hunt me down? Could it be that two extraordinaries are fighting with their extraordinary domains? If that was the case, then he shouldn't have gotten too close. He ordered loudly, turn the rudder quickly. Who would have thought that not only was the cloud expanding at an extremely fast speed, but it was also leak-proof. Suddenly, a long lightning dragon appeared at the edge of the cloud, tearing through the clouds and pouncing towards the airship. Be it in the steering room or on the deck, the group of people turned pale with shock. Leader, it's us. His words were completely useless. The lightning flashed at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, the uncontrollable lightning dragon hit the airship head-on, sending electric arcs everywhere. It must be said that this was Jin Tong's ride. Considering the range of his abilities and the complex environment he was using it in, all the important areas had been isolated by electromagnetic force. However, if the power of extraordinaries was so easily blocked, then they would be underestimating the apex powerhouses of this world too much. The electromagnetic fields interacted with each other, and the killing intent of extraordinaries poured into the airship as catalysis. A considerable portion of the airship's electronic components were instantly burned down. There were even a few unlucky fellows on the deck who were struck by the electric arcs. Their entire bodies caught on fire, and they were sent flying into the sea, sinking to the bottom. Leader! Boss! The members of the hunting group on the deck covered their heads and scurried away like rats, but they didn't forget to call out in warning. However, the response from the cloud of smoke was a second lightning dragon that flew up. Miserable howls rang out in the control room. We've been sucked in. Get lost. Tongken threw himself over to personally take control of the helm, but the steering gear could only turn idle. The system interface next to it was distorted and indistinct. The corresponding powerful electric and magnetic fields exerted their effects at the same time, causing the airship structure to warp violently. At the same time, the people on the airship were also warped. This was the destructive power of extraordinaries, but how did it end up on their heads? In the control room, Tongken was in a daze from the fall. He didn't know how many pieces of equipment had been crushed under his body. As he struggled to get up, his body suddenly stiffened. He could clearly hear the sound of violent panting. How familiar was that sound? It was clearly his leader's voice. He had even used his own psychic perception to capture the location where Luo Nan was suspected to be. That fellow was right above his head. Did he really think he was some sort of supernatural being that overlooked the world? Die! Jin Tong didn't give Luo Nan any time to react. Lightning condensed into a flying spear, and he raised his arm, ready to throw it. His strength was about to be released, but a few ice-cold fingers pressed against his wrist at this time. Behind him, Jin Tong's hair stood on end in an instant. Lightning swam around his body. Under the catalysis of the powerful electric field, his figure seemed to have shed the boundaries of an ordinary body. He twisted into light and pounced forward. He turned back in the blink of an eye, and the thunderclap lightning blade hummed as it slashed forward. The lightning had yet to arrive, but a figure had already appeared. Jin Tong's heart thumped heavily. He felt a bit stuffy. Wuxia. The person behind him wore a white shirt and trousers. His black hair was like a waterfall, and he held a scroll in his hand. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu, who had just beaten him to the point where he couldn't even fight back. Jin Tong's mind nearly exploded in that instant. The only thought in his mind was to turn around and leave. But a second wave of stimulation from the metal headband poured into his mind, catalyzing his state to an unprecedented peak. His mind was even more marvelous. It was as if the heavens were helping him. His gaze swept past, and he suddenly saw a faint shadow on Empress Wu's shoulder and flank. It was like limbs were spreading out. It was like a demon had appeared in a trance. This shadow. It was an incorporeal wraith. It was in the shape of a spider. That's right, the human-faced arachnid. Jin Tong seemed to understand a lot in that instant. He could clearly feel a great loss of blood and energy in this moment. It was as if a demonic god had chopped off half of his flesh and blood. And the flow of the vital energy of the flesh and blood was the amalgamation of the martial monarch and the human-faced arachnid before his eyes. To be precise, it was the image of the martial monarch that the human-faced arachnid had stripped from the depths of his mind. Jin Tong stared fixedly at this demonic image, and a few questions that were hard to solve were connected in his mind bit by bit. Without a doubt, this human-faced arachnid was the one that had possessed his body and soul. Its attack channel was most likely the crack in his mind that had appeared when he faced the martial monarch's miserable defeat. The human-faced arachnid had taken advantage of the flaw in his mind to extract a steady stream of blood essence and vital energy. It had fed Luo Nan's embryonic domain and propelled the operation of the Blood Soul Temple. Now this thing had done something even more inconceivable. It had actually used the demonic barrier in Jin Tong's mind to condense his energy and form the shadow of Her Majesty Empress Wu. Using my heart's demon to kill me. This method is truly marvelous. What a monster! Jin Tong spoke, but he wasn't angry. Instead he was happy. He laughed loudly. In the end, Luo Nan is still a junior. She saw that I had broken through her domain and was about to attack. She was worried, so she ordered the human-faced arachnid to forcefully extract her blood energy. This caused the demon within her body to transform into a demon outside of the martial monarch's form. Perhaps this would have been a brilliant move against the mental side. But I am a fleshly extraordinary who slaughtered my way out of a pile of corpses. Do you really think that I, your father, lost to the martial monarch, can't even beat her shadow? Amidst his loud laughter, electricity coiled around Jin Tong's body. He rebuked the clouds. Very good. As long as I can slay the martial monarch's demonic shadow, it is the same as slaying the flaw in my own mind. I will cut off future troubles. Even if I lose a great deal of blood essence, I will still have gained. When the time comes, I will regain my freedom and open a new world. Jin Tong's laughter had yet to fade away when the stimulating power of the metal headband increased for the third time. He didn't hold back at all. He no longer cared about the injuries on his body. He operated with all his might, pushing the transformation of his body and soul to the limit. It was as if he was still in a state of being aided by the gods. The more painful it was, the clearer it was. Aha! Jin Tong launched an attack at the shadow of the greatest enemy of his life, and the martial monarch's demonic shadow advanced noiselessly. The two sides clashed, colliding dozens of times in an instant. Then, electricity scattered in all directions, and the magnetic field collapsed. Jin Tong spat out a mouthful of blood, and his chest almost collapsed. He had suffered a fatal blow from the martial monarch's demonic shadow, but he cracked a smile. He counterattacked amidst his smile. It was no longer the imposing electricity, but the purest straight punch. His long arm was like a sword as it pierced into the martial monarch's demonic shadow's chest. I'll learn from you. Once the wondrous meaning was felt, the inside and outside became bright. A speck of spiritual light shone through the universe. Jin Tong laughed loudly. He was about to take advantage of the situation and break the domain's embryonic form in one fell swoop, but his laughter suddenly became hoarse. It was also a straight finger. It passed through the martial monarch's demonic shadow, which had already begun to collapse, and pierced his extended arm into his chest. Wherever it hit, the blood coagulated and then spoiled. His internal organs accumulated fluid and rotted in the blink of an eye. His body decayed, and his white bones were exposed. The unrestrained imagination was even more chilling than the bones in front of him. And under the mountain of bones, there was a special component that didn't match the whole thing. It was a half-tilted dual-purpose airship. Its body was twisted and deformed, and there were traces of fire in some areas, but they were also covered by hills of white bones. It was precisely because of the existence of this ship that the dense bone mound obtained enough buoyancy to float on the sea surface. Zhang Ji shifted the camera and scanned the ship. Finally, it locked onto the ship's number and name. Gold accumulation. Zhang Ji scanned through the information in her head, and her breathing became a little stifled. This is the transport vehicle of the 5 metal hunting group. From the looks of it, they might have been completely wiped out. She didn't get a response from Tianbang. It wasn't just because of the noise from inside and outside the helicopter. In fact, ever since they arrived in this area, Tian Bang, who had always liked to joke around and take advantage of others, was surprisingly quiet. At this time, he just knocked on the headset, signaling the pilot to come closer. When the helicopter was almost directly above the White Bone Mountain, Tian Bang, who was at the other side of the hatch, jumped down without any warning and landed on the top of the White Bone Mountain. The top was relatively flat, and the entire White Bone Mountain seemed to be pieced together casually. But it was surprisingly sturdy. The entire White Bone Mountain didn't move at all even after Tian Bang jumped down. There was such a thing? Seeing this, Zhang also wanted to jump down, but just as she moved, she saw Tian Bang waving at her, stopping her. Was there any danger up there? If it was just danger, Zhang wouldn't care. But on top of the White Bone Mountain, Tian Bang's expression was unprecedentedly stern and grave. It directly stopped Zhang from challenging his patience. In the next moment, Zhang saw the format of fire outside Tian Bang's body. He reached out with his arm, but this time, he was absorbing the seawater below the White Bone Mountain. The undulating sea surface was like a dragon sucking in water, and a whirlpool formed. A stream of water directly rose up and went straight to the top of the White Bone Mountain. Another stream of water flowed from bottom to top, submerging the bottom of the White Bone Mountain and the foundation of the ship. The seawater rose and fell, instantly washing the White Bone Mountain. On the mountain, the cracks in the bones and the holes in between had water flowing up and down. What was Tian Bang doing? Zhang didn't understand. There were countless ability users watching the live broadcast right now, and they had the same thoughts as Zhang. However, Luonan didn't care about their discussions and debates in the live broadcast room, the forums, the chat group, and various other channels. Luonan was sitting in the waiting area of Xia City's administrative hall right now. Since it was Sunday, most departments weren't working. There weren't many people here. Qin Ikuan, who was in charge of security, was very idle. He held a flexible screen and watched the live broadcast. The display showed the White Bone Mountain in the open sea, as well as the trajectory of the surging water. Luonan only scanned it twice, closed his eyes, and pondered over his own matters. He was a participant, the leader, and the manipulator of this entire situation. He was also the true winner of today's bountiful profits. Even though it had been some time since the matter, he still needed to calm his mind and straighten out his subsequent train of thought. Yes, he had used his own various resources to successfully behead Jin Tong. This was an amazing accomplishment. And the core thing that allowed him to realize this accomplishment was the altar frame that he and the Wraith Sign had constructed together. It could be called the Beast Fighting Arena. In the marvelous space constructed by the order frame of formatting theory, Luonan was the controller. He had always been playing a game of balance where there were gains and losses, Luonan had experienced something similar before. At the time, the Wraith Sign and Ru-A-Wen had exchanged pointers on the altar. They had risen in level at the same time, ultimately prompting the awakening of Ru-A-Wen's supernatural powers. Another time, the Wraith Sign had crossed space to confront the human-faced arachnid of the Order of Justice. Through these two experiences, Luonan had a general understanding of the operating rules of the altar. As long as one maintained self-will here, one would be able to borrow the power of the sacrificial offering to ascend and break through. One was bound to gain something here. But at the same time, those who stepped onto the altar were sacrificing themselves in order to comply with the ultimate rule. The winner takes all. The loser withered and perished. And relative to the rules, the only people who had special privileges were Luonan and the Wraith Sign. The Wraith Sign was the provider of the altar frame. It possessed the most cunning instinct to utilize the rules. Even if it failed, it could find a scapegoat. The Wraith Sign was the one. Luonan was the controller and supporter of the altar frame. Naturally, he surpassed the Wraith Sign. He was the one. But for now, Luonan was a person with special privileges. He was still fumbling with his own rights. He profited from this and received offerings, but he could not determine victory or defeat between the sacrificers. Right now, the only thing he could control was deciding what the sacrificers could offer and what they couldn't offer. What they could obtain and what they couldn't obtain. For example, though I know your pockets are rich, I don't want money. I only want your fingers. I also know that you are very hungry, but I won't give you food. Instead, I will gift you with beautiful clothes. And so on. Luonan was adjusting throughout the entire battle. He constantly increased the consumption of Jin Tong's flesh and blood according to Jin Tong's state. This allowed Jin Tong's thoughts to grow clearer and clearer, but it also consumed a great deal of mental energy. He maintained the balance of the rules of the altar, but he imposed the imbalance of demands onto Jin Tong's body. From this, he controlled the overall situation. Of course, the most fundamental rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. If Jin Tong really made it through this hurdle, Luo Nan would have no way of stopping him from soaring to the heavens. In reality, one really couldn't underestimate the wisdom and accumulation of any extraordinary. Jin Tong really was going to succeed in the end. However, Ruei Wen appeared just in time. Jin Tong's spiritual awareness broke through the barrier, and his flesh and energy were completely exhausted. She dealt a fatal blow. Everything that Jin Tong had was completely obtained by the side that Luo Nan supported. Right now, the bright imprint that came from Jin Tong's body was climbing up the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple. It passed through the stone forest and the lava lake. Even though the strange energy was melted away, it was unharmed. It passed through the courtyard and the garden. Though the shepherd's imprint was left behind, it did not stop this object. Then there was the third level of the cave. The stone statues of the mushed-mouth ape and Mo Luan were already placed here. This was also the place where Luo Nan could most easily mobilize his combat strength. However, the bright imprint didn't stop at all. It clearly didn't match this cave. This speck of wondrous bright light followed the shape of the mountain of the Blood Soul Temple, winding and lingering. It rose bit by bit along with the flowing lava, all the way to the fourth level. When it reached the group of buildings that resembled temples and halls, it broke away from the flow of flames and entered this place. They were truly on completely different levels. Luo Nan more or less grasped some of the changes in the levels of the Blood Soul Temple. The first level of the Blood Soul Temple was the stone forest and the lava lake. It was a place to digest foreign strange energy. The second level was the stone garden. The shepherd's imprint was stored there. It could barely be considered a place for guests. This was because the few members of the Blood Flame Order had yet to complete the construction of the Blood Soul Temple. It was not easy to control them. Who would have thought that Luo Nan possessed the power of hell in this world? He borrowed the control of the human-faced arachnid to forcefully take down the Blood Soul Temple. Chapter 5:16. In the fierce battle with Jin Tong, the two puppets in the grotto had put in a lot of effort. The mushed-mouth ape had been killed 7 times in a row. If he were to change his name every time he died, he would be called Yuan Jiu now. There was also Mo Luan. He had been killed twice and could now be called Mo Luan III. The successive resurrection of the puppets indeed brought a great deal of consumption to Jin Tong, but it was not without a price. Of these two puppets, the rotten-mouth ape used his own kind as a base, while Mo Luan used Gang Xiong to transform them with a single shot. After the puppet was formed, the cost of forging it again was reduced, but that was only relatively speaking. The mountain of bones in the outer seas of Xia City was proof of this. The reserves that the Blood Soul Temple had accumulated over the past few days had been completely used up in order to support their consumption. The human-faced arachnid had borrowed the power of the Jin Tong to stir up a powerful electromagnetic field. It was also a soul-sucking lure. It had practically slaughtered all the sea creatures within a radius of 200 kilometers. Only then was it able to barely support the Blood Soul Temple. Oh, there were also those unlucky bastards from the 5 Metals hunting group. Actually, if Jin Tong could calm his mind a bit, or if he could kill the mushed-mouth ape and Mo Luan a bit more fiercely and quickly, he could kill 2 more rounds of the human-faced arachnid before it could successfully transform into an external demon. Then perhaps Luo Nan really would have lost all of his corrosive light. Victory and defeat were separated by a thin line. However, the person who replayed the battle could only be the one who was alive. No matter how difficult it was for Luo Nan to win, no matter how distressed he was right now, these were all treatments that only the victor could enjoy. Now the golden tree essence chi that the altar frame had seized should be divided equally between Ruei Wen and the Blood Soul Temple. However, with Ruei Wen's unique ability to assimilate her body and soul, she had no interest in these foreign impurities. She did not accept them at all, which benefited the Blood Soul Temple. The problem was that in the level of a closed system, the Blood Soul Temple really did not have the capital to monopolize it. A portion of it would be transferred to the Wraith Sign to enjoy, and the Wraith Sign would divide out a portion to offer to Luo Nan. Most of the resources used by the Bloody Soul Temple were used to build the Path of Blood and Fire. Currently, the altar at the summit had just been built, and the first 5 stages of the Bloody Soul Temple had been completed. There wasn't much left. The Blood Soul Temple was still continuously converting the impurities from the outside world to replenish their losses. The whirlpool in the lava lake in the stone forest was surging. It was chaotic. In front of Worker Zhai, the abandoned driveway that ran through the River Wu district, Forest Wall district, and Trigate district was already covered in thin ice. The bandits on the road had also quietened down. Luo Nen frowned as he observed Worker Zhai for a moment. His initial judgment was that Worker Zhai was in a state that seemed to be calm yet wasn't. It was a bit like an epiphany. The breadth and depth of Worker Zhai's processing of information should have increased. Dean Wan and I both feel that old Zhai has entered some sort of state of enlightenment. However, it's hard to say what he's comprehending. This is a matter of the spiritual domain. You're an expert and you've been close to Zhai Yunsheng recently. Do you have any guesses? When did I become an expert? Luo Nan shook his head. Actually, he already had a general understanding of what was going on. Moreover, he could solve the problem right now. However, doing this would be too shocking, and it might expose his trump card. I'd better go there. This was not the first time Moya sighed with emotion. With Rui Wen's special innate talent of body and soul merging, her entire body was pure and translucent, almost inhuman. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was spotless, and that her skin was like jade. Even with a magnifying glass, one wouldn't be able to find any flaws. It was useless for Moya to be envious of him. Luo Nan was still worried. If Rui Wen wasn't used to Moya's intimate actions and disappeared into thin air in a flash, that would be quite awkward. Fortunately, Rui Wen was very calm, and could even be said to be very obedient. She allowed Moya to fiddle with her, but her eyes were always fixed on this woman who was a head taller than her. It seemed that she was observing her, and perhaps even a little curious. This is a good start. In the end, Moya was still a semi-professional who raised a younger brother at home. She wasn't blindly unrestrained and passionate. After expressing enough goodwill towards Rui Wen, she continued to close the distance from a new angle. Let me see. The wristband is already fitted. The SCA is the most active at times like this. Have you added me as a friend yet? Come. I'll be the first. Perhaps it was because she was stained with the blood of the Luo family, but Moya was quite accomplished when it came to acting as if no one else was present. Deputy Bureau Chief, who was a bit embarrassed, to the side. He subconsciously coughed. He was a bit confused about the relationship between Luo Nan and Moya. At first, he thought that they were ability users, or friends or lovers, but then he felt that it wasn't the case. They were most likely brother and sister. Why do I feel that it's a bit weird? Deputy Bureau Chief, who faintly felt that he had grasped something, but he couldn't make it clear for a time. Right when he was in a daze, he heard Moya introduce her communicator number to Rui Wen. Oh, this is my name. Moya. If you want to chat with me, just tap on it. Voice control is fine too. Moya. Deputy Bureau Chief, who was still under a lot of pressure. His mind was a bit absent-minded. He subconsciously said this name. Moya turned her head in a daze. You are? Who? Uncle who? Moya never thought that she would bump into someone she knew here. Moreover, this person's identity was quite sensitive. She was also stunned for a moment. Fortunately, she reacted quickly. She recalled the surname of this middle-aged man and greeted him. She felt that she was a generation lower than him. She had no choice. This Deputy Bureau Chief, who was in the same Xia City SCA branch as her father. Even though they weren't under the same command, they were still on the same level. She had met him a few times during the internal family parties of the branch. She had even been half-truthfully mentioned as a partner. Oh my, it seemed that her mouth had been slapped just now. Chapter 5:18. The jeep started moving. It first headed south, circled around the Huanhai Highway, and headed toward the Western Forest Wall District. Luo Nan received Moya's reminder in the car. He gave his aunt a call. The outside world was in a state of chaos. He had to report that he was safe no matter what. The call didn't last long. It ended after a minute or two. Everything was normal on the phone, but Luo Nan couldn't help but stroke his brows. He didn't know when his brows had become knotted. It must be known that the entirety of Xia City was under the surveillance of his soul cloak. Luo Nan poured his thoughts into it, and no changes in the situation at home could be hidden from his eyes. Luo Nan's aunt and uncle were sitting in the living room at home right now. The two were silent. Luo Shuqing had been fiddling with the wristband on her wrist the entire time after the call ended. Her expression could be described as calm or repressed. She wasn't as calm as she appeared on the phone. As for Luo Nan's uncle, Amo Haihang, he was sitting to the side. He was hugging his stupid, black, and thick mobile workstation, operating it. He even had an electronic cigarette in his mouth. Steam rose, and it made a sizzling sound. This scene made Luo Nan think of the time when he eavesdropped on Luo Nan's uncle and aunt's conversation. They and Emoya. Where did their train of thought go? Luo Nan spoke subconsciously. He didn't want to hear an answer. He just wanted to calm his emotions a bit. Qin Ikuan, who was next to him, thought seriously for a moment. He replied, "From Miss Emoya's behavior, perhaps she believes that your research results have been sold for a good price, or that you have a very powerful investor." Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He turned his head. Qin Ikuan spoke softly. "The research of supernatural powers has made quite a bit of progress in recent years. It also represents a certain trend. Therefore, there has always been a lot of active capital in the outer circles of the inner world. They will always set their eyes on some projects with potential. They will use all kinds of methods to invest in relationships in an attempt to get a share of the pie. Of course, once capital is injected, whether ability users or capital is the leader will depend on the specific situation and analysis." Luo Nan went, "Oh." Qin Ikuan's words reminded him of something similar. Octopus and Crag Burst had told him about this before. Octopus had yet to finalize his latest thesis, but a pharmaceutical company had already come knocking on his door. They wished to jointly develop relevant targeted drugs. It was said that the VAM agreement was quite considerable. In this sense, it was not impossible to say that Luo Nan's research results could be sold for a good price. This is a good reason. Luo Nan was a bit moved. If he could do more research on this and gradually transfer his situation in the inner world, it would not be a problem. But perhaps it was because of the continuous advancement of his cultivation and the influence of his glorious battle achievements, Luo Nan had a marvelous confidence and premonition right now. Perhaps it was a misconception. In reality, this wasn't something that suddenly appeared. It had formed a long time ago. Just if his grandfather always adhered to the logic of formatting theory, then perhaps the only person who could communicate with him would be Luo Nan himself. Even if he couldn't do it right now, sooner or later he would discover a docking window as his understanding and application of formatting theory deepened. Luo Nan had once thought of using a psychic's drawing to try it out, but now that he thought about it, it was quite unrealistic. Due to the aggravation of his schizophrenia, the heavens knew what the drawing looked like in his grandfather's eyes. Only by truly connecting their minds could that tiny bit of possibility be unearthed. Luo Nan turned his head to face Rue Wan when his thoughts reached this point. "It'll be a bit quieter in 2 days. I'll take you to see my grandfather. There's a new person in the family. I should at least let him know." Rue Wan listened quietly. She didn't say much. Luo Nan knew that she didn't refuse, and that was enough. Luo Nan let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. He slightly closed his eyelids, but when he wanted to open them again, he felt that they were strangely heavy. A deep black tide surged over in an instant, nearly engulfing him. He did his best to open his eyes twice, but he actually couldn't open them. He nearly wanted to fall asleep. But he was suddenly startled in his daze. He suddenly exerted strength and broke out in a layer of cold sweat. Only then did his drowsiness disappear a bit. "Mr. Luo?" Qin Ikuan noticed Luo Nan's mental state. He was a bit worried. "You should sleep in the car for a bit. You haven't slept for nearly 40 hours. "It's nothing. I was just thinking about something." Luo Nan told a completely unconvincing lie and said, "Open the car windows. Let some air in." This didn't quite meet the security requirements, but God, who sat in the driver's seat, still did as he was told. As the car windows were lowered, the air currents brought about by the high-speed travel, along with the freezing rain and cold air, surged in. This caused Luo Nan's mind to shake, and quite a bit of his drowsiness disappeared. However, he understood very well that this was a temporary phenomenon. Not sleeping for 40 hours wasn't a reason for him to be sleepy. With his current level of cultivation and attainments, not sleeping for 4 days was no big deal. However, the current situation was different in the end. The root of everything was still the soul cloak that he had unfurled with all his strength. But right now, they were paying attention to this program because it was relatively sensitive and closely related to the mission. Right now, the program was displaying a certain region in the outer seas of Xia City. The Hill of Bones was floating on the surface of the sea. Luo Nan had nothing to say. Is Zhang Ji still broadcasting live? Qin Yikuan answered, right now she's only providing the live footage. The main point is still the analysis of the experts. God increased the volume of the program as he spoke, and he transmitted the image to the audio and video system in the back seats. Without the stimulating immersive scene, the appeal of Zhang Ji's live broadcast would drop by over half. Right now, they were faced with this extremely topical topic, but there was no straightforward answer to the Hill of Bones. It was the turn of the experts from all walks of life to step onto the stage and display their talent for nonsense. It was reasonable to say that the most important question was who created the Hill of Bones. However, a large portion of the energy of the experts from all walks of life wasn't focused on this. Instead, they were focused on the accumulating gold beneath the Hill of Bones. This dual-purpose ship possessed a very strong symbolic significance. Especially when the search work continued. More and more corpses and remains of the members of the 5-metal hunting group were found in the surrounding seas. The topic of discussion inevitably pointed towards a most crucial point. The 5-metal hunting group was nearly completely annihilated. This was something that could already be confirmed. But had the true soul of the group, Jin Tong, already melted into this Hill of Bones? Not even his bones remained? Or did he rely on the inconceivable abilities of extraordinaries to avoid death? Whether he lived or died, whether he survived or perished. This determined the nature of this matter. Aside from this, even if the number of people who died was multiplied by 10, it still wouldn't have any decisive significance. And for the Xia City branch, the focus of their attention was different. Qin Yikuan spoke in a low voice, looking at the intelligence from the various airlines and various internal transportation points. I'm afraid that there will be a large number of people entering the country in the next few days. The intimidation generated by this live broadcast is lower than we expected. If Her Majesty Empress Wu could. Sigh. Qin Yikuan felt that it was useless to say anything more when he spoke to this point. He shook his head and shut his mouth. However, Luo Nan already understood what Qin Yikuan meant. He shook his head as well, but the meaning behind Qin Yikuan's words was quite different. 16 billion. 2 out of 1,000. The vast majority of people will be tempted. But the ones who are tempted and have the power to act will always be a small portion. Qin Yikuan found Luo Nan's words strange. However, this sort of three-dimensional curved structure was extremely difficult to draw by hand, compared to forming it with one's thoughts. Smooth lines required considerable professional skill. Luo Nan and Worker Zhai both had this. Worker Zhai could see that Luo Nan's composition, lines, and so on were beautiful, but they weren't particularly precise. They were more like freehand strokes. It was undeniable that this method was exceptionally smooth. Soon, the projection area was filled with over a dozen similar structures. Luo Nan even turned on the animation effects, causing these donuts to flip back and forth. Then Luo Nan crooked his finger at Di Wei Wu. Come, Wei Wu. I'll show you a magic trick. Ha! Blow on these donuts. There'll be a surprise. Are you trying to coax a child? If you don't come, I'll have your sister Rui Wen blow. TCH. Ah, sister? Di Wei Wu was shocked. This was a situation he never imagined. He instinctively looked at Rui Wen's chest. Luo Nan flicked a raindrop with his finger, and it hit Di Wei Wu on the forehead. Are you going to blow or not? Blow. Watch me blow your cowhide off. Even though Luo Nan said this, Di Wei Wu still moved forward with great interest. He puffed his cheeks and fiercely blew on the painting area. It was at this moment that the dozen or so donuts in the work area seemed to be brushed by the airflow. They floated out from the bound light of the work area. They seemed to be stained with special light powder, and they transformed into glowing bubbles that changed shape and scattered outwards. Wow! This is cool! Di Weiwu praised loudly. He was completely unaware of the difficulty of producing a similar scene. Luo Nan's method was inspired by the Order of Justice. Back then, the Order of Justice had used a projector to construct the structure of the sacred space. There was also the Myriad Towers. They had used a similar method to test Xie Junping and Du Yong's attainments in the mystic arts. Compared to the projector array, Luo Nan's method embodied the interference effect of soul strength, turning the void into reality. His method of using interference strength to draw in light was even more breathtaking. Of course, the magic trick was just a gimmick. The true value of this method was revealed later. The glowing bubbles rapidly shrank at a visible rate. A small portion of them collapsed due to structural instability, but most of them shrunk to the point where it was hard to see with the naked eye. This was because the work area of the flexible screen was loaded with the glimmering energy of the glimmering screen. It released rays of light that were like the eye of a needle. 2 seconds later, these rays of light transformed into resplendent pearl-like light. This was because the structure of the condensation rings had successfully gathered water molecules. The water droplets refracted light. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.